Hi, I'm James Hamilton from Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal, and while I sharpen up a couple of tools, I have something to say about sharpening in general that may change the way you look at the whole process. If you've ever been to a sharpening trade show or posted in an online sharpening forum, these folks take sharpening really seriously, and that's putting it mildly. I've seen some things said during simple disagreements over sharpening that would make the internet blush. For some folks, there's no such thing as sharp enough. If you don't do it their way, you are a moron. But today I'm going to risk the abuse for the sake of regular weekend woodworkers who are confused by all the bluster out there, which mostly comes from professional woodworkers that don't do the same type of woodworking that the average guy does. I'm here to tell you that most woodworkers can sharpen their tools with just one stone and a chunk of stropping leather. This is a two-sided diamond stone. One side is 300 grit, the other side is 1,000. I only use that coarse side if I have to repair an edge. My sharpening is done primarily with the 1,000 grit side. Now, the sharpening fanatics out there will tell you that 1,000 grit is not nearly fine enough. They'll say you need 2 or 3 or 4 stones so you can work your way all the way up through the grits to 8, 10, or 15,000. If you want to buy a bunch of stones, go ahead and buy a bunch of stones. I am not telling you stop sharpening to 15 or 20 or 30 or 50,000 grit. I'm just saying that for a lot of woodworkers, you could keep it a lot simpler than that. Your ancestors knew how to keep it simpler. Old-timey woodworkers, the guys who made all that beautiful furniture that you see in antique shops and museums, they did everything with hand tools. To sharpen them, they had to use the natural stones that were available to them at the time. How fine those stones were depended on where they were mined. Belgian stones, for example, were highly prized all the way back into Roman times and could be compared to modern stones of several thousand grit. But few woodworkers had access to stones like that. Most used something like novaculite, which is found all over the world. In America, we call them Arkansas stones. If you walked into an 18th or 19th century American woodworking shop, you'd probably find Washita, or what they called a soft Arkansas stone. If you compared those to our modern grit charts, they would fall in the 400 to 600 grit range. That's about as sharp as your great-great-grandfather's chisels and hand planes were. Hard Arkansas stones were around, and they could get above 1,000 grit, but few woodworkers used multiple stones to achieve that super fine edge like we seem to do today. Want a real-world example? A few years back, a well-known woodworking figure who has spent a lifetime in woodworking with hand tools and teaching them for years and years and years said that the old-timey furniture makers that he apprenticed with 50 years ago in Europe sharpened everything with a single double-sided stone. 250 grit on one side, 400 grit on the other. That's it, just one stone. He wasn't saying you should stop sharpening your tools at 250 grit and be done with it. He was saying you don't need to use a bunch of stones to get an uber sharp edge just so you can shave your body hair off with your chisel. That doesn't impress people as much as you think it does. And it's not necessary for regular, everyday weekend woodworking. Wood's an abrasive material. After a few strokes, that scary sharp 30 grit edge is going to be reduced considerably anyway. Now, we've got some tools sharpened on a 1,000 grit trend diamond stone. You could use 1,000 grit sandpaper or a water stone. I like diamonds better because they're fast and they're easy. There's no spray glue. It'll last nearly forever, and I don't have to maintain it to keep it flat. It's going to be super flat all the time, no matter how often I use it, unlike a water stone or even an Arkansas stone. If you look at the edge of a tool sharpened to 1,000 grit, you can see scratches from the diamonds. Modern wisdom tells us that a tool has to be shiny like a mirror to effectively cut wood. Is that true? Let's put that to a test. This plane sharpened to 1,000 grit has no problem making shavings, and the surface left behind is as smooth as most people will sand to. Now, is this sharp enough in every situation? No, not necessarily. Sometimes soft pine, end grain for example, will compress if the edge of your tool isn't really sharp. So if you're chopping the waste away on dovetails, you can encounter that. And a sharper edge will require less force to move it through the wood. That can be a factor if you're going to do a lot of chiseling or planing. or highly figured woods can benefit from a super sharp edge as long as that edge lasts, which usually isn't all that long. But these situations aren't the ones that most common, everyday weekend woodworkers find themselves in very often, if at all. And even if they did, I can still get these edges considerably sharper than that 1000 grit without using another expensive stone. Instead, I'm going to use my leather strop, which I've loaded up with some honing paste. This stuff goes on white, but you can see it almost immediately starting to turn dark because it's removing the steel that quickly. I don't have to keep putting paste on my strop. Once it starts getting loaded like this one is, I can do tons and tons of honing without more application. So the paste costs practically nothing in the long run. Just a few strokes on the cutting edge is really what's important. You don't have to polish the whole bevel of a chisel or a hand plane. And then of course you want to do some strokes on the back as well. Now, let's see if this tool, sharpened with a 1000 grit diamond stone and polished with a strop, is sharp enough for woodworking. It takes very little pressure to pare the soft pine end grain without crushing or tearing out the fibers. And here's some hard maple end grain. Now tell me that that is not sharp enough for woodworking. One stone, one piece of leather, it doesn't get much simpler than that. Now, like I said, you could use sandpaper, you could use water stones. I really prefer the diamond. I think it's definitely a good investment. But if you do need something like a stone or the leather strop or some paste, check out the links below. Just click on Show More if you're on YouTube. For more great tips, tricks, and tutorials designed to make you a better woodworker, check out Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal. You can read and subscribe for free at stumpynubs.com. Happy honing!